Hey everyone, I'm Matt Friedman, Matt at the Oracle. It's Thursday, September 24, 2015, which means that it's time for another edition of the College Daily Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. This is the PFF radio show dedicated to college football and daily fantasy sports, and we have a great show coming up. With me is Wes Huber, a college football DFS savant and a PFF fantasy college football lead writer. You can follow him on Twitter at PFF_Wes. Wes, how's it going?
Doing great, Matt. Looking forward to the show.
Yeah, it is week 4. The season is no longer young. Some teams have already played 25% of their schedule, 33% after this weekend. We're getting some fantastic matchups this week. The races for the various conference championships are starting to take shape, and we are covering all of it, breaking all of it down for you at Pro Football Focus. We can help you stay on top of the action. We have a ton of great college football content. And with the PFF Fantasy Gold package, you can get it all for only $29.99. All right, for the listeners, you know the drill by now. We're going to start out by looking at some notable storylines, some happenings for Saturday's games. Wes is going to highlight some of the important Las Vegas lines, and then we're going to give you our Week 4 DraftKings and FanDuel plays of the week. And then Wes will close it out by giving you a couple of plays for Fantasy Feud. It's going to be a good show. Wes, let's get into it. Give us the rundown for some of the top storylines, events, injuries, suspensions, all of that. What are the news items that you think fantasy players need to be aware of for Week 4? And let's start with the quarterback position.
Okay, yeah. Well, first off, John Walford of Wake Forest, he has an injured ankle from the Army game. He took a sequence of big hits. The offensive line in Wake Forest is it's extremely porous. I doubt he plays this weekend. I see Kendall Hilton getting the start. Even if he were to play, there's rain in the forecast, and it's likely not going to be pretty. The offensive line just can't protect him. Vernon Adams Jr., he is listed as the starter against Utah. It looks like he's going to be back. He claims that his finger's around 80% health, which is, I guess, good enough for him and the coaches. One of my guys, Jacquez Johnson of Florida Atlantic, he hurt his ankle as well in the Miami game a couple of weeks back in Week 2. He took first-team reps today, and he could return this week to play Charlotte. Blake Decker, actually, I mentioned on last week's show that he was questionable and looking like he wasn't going to play against Michigan, but he actually did play. I think he played somewhere around 11 of 13 offensive series. Of course, they lost. The UNLV team's not that great, but he's back. He's going to play. So if you normally would play him, he's good to go. And then one quarterback for I believe it's tomorrow night's game. Boise State quarterback Ryan Finley broke his ankle against Idaho State. He is out. Thomas Stewart, Brett Rippon, we don't really know. One or both are gonna fill in for him. Going down to some suspensions, Treon Harris, who had recently lost the quarterback battle with Will Grier in Florida, he is suspended for this weekend's game against Tennessee, and he was involved with something with a cornerback on the team. He is also suspended. As far as new starter situations, I guess I kind of want to lead into one of them with the Duke Williams watch. He is free of trouble, and he's seeing a big change at quarterback where Sean White will take over at Auburn. Redshirt freshman with loads of talent. I'm excited to see what he can do with Duke Williams, and they've got a couple other receivers, and I really like the running backs. And if they can just get their quarterback to play reasonably well, I think Auburn has a real shot at the West this year in the SEC. And Sean White will start this weekend, and it sounds like he's got the full support of the coach until further notice. Over in South Carolina, I mean, they definitely have to be worried about their season. The head football coach has decided, after losing the three-head quarterback race that they had over in the offseason, well, they lost the guy who won that. They played the guy who they thought would be the second best, Perry Orth. Well, now he was horrible last week. And so now they're turning to Lorenzo Nunez, which a true freshman, burning a red shirt. I'm almost positive he was set in a vacuum under a red shirt, but that is no longer the case. He will start against UCF. And then, of course, we have the Cardale Jones and JT Barrett situation. I'm really hoping that Urban Meyer has made a lasting decision to give Cardale Jones a longer look. I really don't like how he's switching his quarterbacks in and out. Now, I don't think that either player doesn't deserve to play, but the simple fact remains these quarterbacks, whichever one you choose, I mean, they need to build rhythm with their offense, with their offensive line. I think that plays a lot into the struggles that the Ohio State offensive line has had is just having two different style of quarterbacks leading the team. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for quarterbacks coming into week 4.
Well, let's go to the running back position. Any news items there?
Yeah, there's actually several. On the injury front, Trey Madden, the USC, they lost to Stanford last week in a pretty big upset, actually. I did not see that coming. I watched the week 1 Northwestern loss, and Stanford looked horrible, and Kevin Hogan looked twice as bad. But he's been playing really well lately. Well, Trey Madden, who's had back-to-back years of injury-riddled seasons and multiple knee surgeries, he tweaked his surgically repaired knee in the Stanford game. But he actually has made a miraculous turnaround, and he is going to play this week against Arizona State, which the way he's been playing, that's a big plus for USC. They're going to need him with that defense that they're fielding. Daniel Lasco at California, he's got a nagging hip injury. He missed last week's game against Texas that they actually almost lost. The Jared Hurd Longhorns almost came back on him. But, yeah, he's questionable to face Washington this week, which wouldn't be a bad week for him to sit out, considering I believe they're the number 13 run defense in the country. Washington is a surprising team to many. They're definitely one to watch. News reported, I don't know, two and a half hours ago, at least real time. Corey Clement of Wisconsin, some considered him to be the top overall pick in fantasy drafts. He's out for 4 to 6 weeks. He's having sports hernia surgery. So I'm just going to have to hang tight. I wouldn't drop him, as he will be back. Kareem Hunt, we just got that weapon back last week for Toledo. And now he actually left that game against Iowa State after putting up some good numbers. He was also a top 10 running back and in most drafts, a first-round pick. And he's going to be questionable to face Arkansas State. Damian Jones-Moore would probably start for him. More than probably, he would start for him. And then we have Russell Hansborough in Missouri. He's actually had nagging ankle injuries since last year's SEC championship game against Alabama. He is just now feeling 100%, looking like he's going to play this week against Kentucky. That'll be a big plus for them. Georgia Tech went into Notre Dame and came out 2 running backs short. They lost Quay Searcy as well as Broderick Snoddy. They're both questionable this week, and of course undisclosed injuries, which is the college thing. And then Brandon Wiles of South Carolina, as if they weren't having enough problems, is also questionable, and he has a rib injury. If he does not play against UCF, it'll be the David Williams show. And then Colorado lost Michael Atkins II. I shouldn't say lost, but he's unlikely to play this week, considering the opponent. They're going up against Nicholls State. He has an injured hamstring, but if you play in a fantasy format, that would allow you to play Christian Powell, without taking a big hit by sitting somebody, then he would be a pretty good play there. As far as replacements for Daniel Lasco, Vic Inwari and Kalfani Muhammad, are definitely in play. I did mention the tough Washington run defense, and that's something you want to keep in mind. But they will get their touches, and we'll probably see a similar carry distribution to what we saw in Week 3, where Imare received 16 carries to Muhammad's 10. And then William Stanback of UCF was dismissed from the college program. He's no longer with them for various reasons. And Taj McGowan, who has been struggling this year, but looking like he's just the lead back, about to get as many carries as his body can handle. And then for Corey Clement, Dare Ogunbowale is definitely a name to keep in mind. He is the definite number 2 there in Wisconsin. They're going up against Hawaii this week, which is a pretty decent run defense. We'll get into that later. And then the third stringer, Taiwan Deal, also has value, but Dare is the one that catches the passes, so he's the one that I'm excited about. In Iowa, LaShawn Daniels Jr. has been dropped to number 2 on the depth chart. Jordan Canzeri is now the starter. It's not for performance. It's because of a lingering ankle injury on Daniels. Canzeri will probably see a pretty good load of carries. He's not a big guy, though, so I wouldn't be surprised if he gets nicked up along the way. And that'll do it for the running backs.
And I'm with you there on Dare. He's already had some games with really strong production so far. Let's go to the wide receivers. What are the storylines there?
Okay, one of my my GPP plays last week was Michael Summers at Georgia Tech. It's just another name on the list. Yeah, he went down early in the Notre Dame game. And basically the only wide receiver of value on the Georgia Tech roster. They lost, of course, Darren Waller. I can't remember the other wide receiver's name, but yeah, it was a lot of receptions were available there, deep receptions that he was eating up, and couple catches a game. But when you take them for 40 yards, they add up. A big loss out of UCF. Of course, we just talked about William Stanback, but Jordan Akins, who was looking to be their number 1. He's out for the year, tore his ACL, but that makes Traquan Smith someone to definitely keep in mind. He had standalone value prior to the injury, so I'm really interested to see how high that can go. Alabama lost Robert Foster, out for the season with a torn rotator cuff. It's not looking good in Alabama after the loss to Ole Miss, and they just we'll see what happens. I mean, you doubt the Tide, and you get proved wrong. So we'll see. And then as far as new starters, a guy that I'll mention later, Kavonte Turpin, TCU. It's looking like Desmond White might be unavailable this week against Texas Tech, which is likely to be a shootout in all sense of the term. And Turpin would probably start in the slot, which he could have some sneaky value.
All right, and if we have to talk about tight ends, I guess we have to. Are there any news items there?
Yeah, there's one, and I purposefully only chose one because I'm not going to spend that much time talking on tight ends, considering I don't mess with tight ends except for FanDuel. I guess Fantasy Feud and the others have it, but Deion Watson for Idaho. He did not play last week, and it allowed his backup, Buck Cowan, to play, and all he did was go out, catch 7 passes for 100 yards against Wofford, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in the Idaho offense, we're talking about some explosive weapons. Even when Watson comes back, I see Cowan as somebody that to definitely consider at the tight end position. But it looks like Watson won't play this week against Georgia Southern. So, if you're in a format that has Buck Cowan, definitely snag him up and see if he can repeat that performance.
You gotta love guys named Buck. All right, let's talk about some of the Vegas lines, starting with the games that look like they will have a lot of point opportunities for players. One of those huge games looks like Bowling Green State playing at Purdue. Bowling Green State has a big point total. Talk to us about that matchup.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one in West Lafayette. And actually, I should have mentioned the Purdue actually lost or they're switching their quarterback. They're going to, I believe his name's David Bowe, and it's definitely adding a little extra intrigue to it, considering Austin Appleby had thrown I think 6 or 7 interceptions over the first 3 games, which is the most in the NCAA. Yeah, David Blau. He's been promoted to start this game against Bowling Green. I'm excited to see what can happen. I mean, Matt Johnson has been all that and more. I mean, when he went down last year, it destroyed the chances of Bowling Green. They had a solid squad. He comes back and it's still intact, basically. I like how they have the same running backs, yet he's averaging 470 passing yards a game. It's ridiculous, and it's a lot of fun. And this is a game to keep an eye on. It's got a 75 point over under. Over the last 3 days, it's actually risen by 0.5. I would not be surprised at all if David Blau is in any way capable. I would not be surprised with how poor the Bowling Green defense is for this game to even exceed the 75 points. Bowling Green is only a 2.5 point favorite. If you read my article, my predictions and picks on PFF, you'll know that this is definitely a one you might want to throw a few dollars on. I can't see how Purdue can keep up with Bowling Green. Their offense is based around the run, and Bowling Green they don't have time to run the ball because they're looking 50 yards down the field. And over the last 2 days, just to give you an idea, Bowling Green has actually added 1.5 points. I wouldn't be surprised if Bowling Green beats Purdue by more than a touchdown. Bowling Green, they're both 1-2. But Bowling Green has been in every game they played. They lost the Memphis game on the last drive of the game, which was really disappointing for them because they had them beat. But good for Memphis. The Tennessee game, they had them pretty close at halftime, but then lost it in the second half. And that was just a bit overmatched. Defensively against Tennessee, although Johnson still went crazy. But yeah, Bowling Green's not going to provide any type of defense. They're 116th in rushing defense. They give up almost 240 yards a game. They're 15th in total defense. They allow 6.5 yards per play. So I mean, they're basically just letting you score, and they'll turn around and score faster. They have obviously the top passing offense. They're averaging 455 yards a game and 14.7 yards per completion. Purdue, on the other hand, they beat Indiana State. And that should tell you everything you need to know. Their only win, they lost to Marshall, which was a closer one, but they lost to Virginia Tech pretty handily. They're the 89th ranked rushing defense. They've actually been decent at rushing. Like I said, they're more of a rushing offense with 193 yards a game. But they just don't, on paper, they don't seem to have anything that's going to match up with Bowling Green.
All right, another matchup of interest is Texas Christian against Texas Tech. That's being played in Lubbock. A huge over-under. Both teams projected to score through the roof. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, that one is another that I think is going to go above the 80.5 over-under. It's gone up 1.5 points over the last 3 days. It's probably going to continue to rise. The spread has gone in favor of Texas Tech over the last 3 days by a full point. I don't see how that is in any way going to happen. I realize that they're playing at home, but TCU is they're not Arkansas. They have Arkansas's defense with as good an offense as you'll find in the country. A little surprised, a couple of weaknesses in the TCU defense right now, but it's early. TCU, of course, beat Minnesota in a really tight game. And then they beat SMU and SF Austin as well. But the thing that concerns me with them is that they're 68th in rushing defense, despite the fact that Minnesota had yet to select an individual running back, and then they played against two other opponents, which SMU, which is not a running team. Their quarterback does scramble, but they don't have dominant running backs. And then SF Austin, and of course, talking about an FCS school. So yeah, a little concern with if they need to stop the run in order to compete this year. So we'll need to see about that. They're rushing, they're passing. They're actually this is a matchup of two teams in the top 10 in third down conversion percentage. The two teams in the top 10 in passing offense. Now the big difference though is Texas Tech. Of course, they beat Sam Houston, UTEP, and Arkansas, but their defense is at the bottom. They're number 122 in rushing defense. Aaron Green's going to have a field day against Texas Tech. They're 112th in total defense. They give up 7.2 yards a game, 7.2 yards a play, which is ridiculous. I mean, they're almost giving up a first down every time the opponent snaps the ball. But yeah, I mean, they're averaging 400 yards a game and 15 yards per completion. And the real surprising thing about Texas Tech is they're actually number 56 in rushing offense, which is pretty surprising. They're averaging 191.3 yards a game, despite averaging 400 yards passing a game. It's pretty impressive. So,
all right, and then finally, let's go to UCLA at Arizona.
Yeah, I chose this game more because of the stacking options available. I like a few of the lesser-known wide receivers on Arizona. Of course, UCLA just lost Miles Jack, which is bad for them, but good for the fantasy prospects. We're looking at a 66 over/under. That's increased a couple points over the last couple days. UCLA is a 3-point favorite. I tend to lean towards Arizona here, playing at home. They've actually gained a half a point on the spread over the last couple of days. UCLA, of course, started out, beat Virginia with that impressive showing by Josh Rosen, their true freshman phenom quarterback. Then he's come way back down to earth against UNLV and BYU, nowhere near as impressive. And actually, he's falling down the ranks right now. We'll need to see him show a little something more consistency-wise in order to put him up there with some of the lofty expectations we had for him. As far as UCLA, like I said, they lost Miles Jack. They were the 60th ranked rushing defense and 39th total defense prior to the injury. It definitely is not going to help that their best cover linebacker is out. And they're decent on offense, only averaging 11 yards per passing completion, which is pretty low. But the rushing attack, it has been excellent. It's superior rushing attack, which actually sealed the victory last week against BYU. Arizona, they're a team that if they weren't playing at home, I wouldn't be picking them in this game. They played UTSA, Nevada, Northern Arizona, and honestly, it's basically as simple as those teams just could not stop the Arizona spread option. Anu Solomon was just taking the snap, taking one step back and firing the ball, when he wasn't handing off. And that was basically all three wins. They have the number 7 rushing attack right now, but again, I'm not saying that they're not good. They're good. Nick Wilson is definitely a name to know, but they're averaging 321 rushing yards a game. That's not going to continue in the Pac-12. The Pac-10, and their passing offense is on paper it looks great. Number 45 in the country, but honestly, when you look at Anu Solomon's numbers a little bit deeper, it passes beyond 10 yards. His accuracy, just pretty much his QBR, everything QBR, it just drops precipitously. It's it's really discouraging when you get to like 20 yards. That we're talking some serious differences in the touch that he puts on the ball.
All right, Wes, there are probably a couple matchups that people should be cautious about. One of those is Northern Illinois, Boston College, and I think another one would be Tennessee at Florida. Talk to us quickly about those.
Yeah, I mean, I basically just went with two here because I like a lot of all the matchups out there, really. But yeah, Northern Illinois, Boston College. Boston College just lost their starting quarterback Darius Wade last week to Florida State. He's done for the year. They're surprisingly a 5-point favorite in this game. They're playing at home in Chestnut Hill. I get that, but I think the way Northern Illinois played against Ohio State, if it were to carry over in any way to the Boston College game, the way Florida State beat them, I mean they don't have to be as good as Florida State to take down Boston College. This looks like a win for Northern Illinois, but I'm basically staying away from this in fantasy. It's a 47 over under. There's just not a lot of options. I do like Kenny Galladay, wide receiver for Northern Illinois, but for the most part, it's just a matchup to avoid. Boston College has the number one rushing defense and the number one total defense in the country right now. As far as Tennessee and Florida, I mean, I love these teams. It's as simple as they're playing in the swamp. Florida's defense is one of the top in the country. The offense is young for Florida and not firing on all cylinders. Although I have a lot of hope for him, I think Will Grier is going to be a great quarterback. But Tennessee is going to have a very difficult time putting a lot of points up on the board to feed fantasy rosters. I think if you were to just nitpick a player from one player from a team, it would be okay. But I would mostly avoid stacking from this game. Florida they're swapping points back and forth on the spread. Tennessee's currently the favorite with a 1-point favorite to win the game. Yeah, I mean, between the two teams, the only game that we have that we can look at and say, okay, this tells us a lot about them is the Oklahoma game, and of course Tennessee lost. So it'll be interesting. This game's going to be awesome. I'll definitely watch it, but I'm going to avoid stacking it in fantasy DFS.
All right, Wes, fantastic information as always. That's going to be very useful to everyone setting their college fantasy football lineups. And of course, the NFL regular season is underway. It is week 3 in the NFL, which means that fantasy football is in full swing. It's back, and it feels like the playoffs every week, thanks to 1 Week Fantasy Football at DraftKings.com, with millions of dollars being won each week. Every play in every game could take you closer to a life-changing payday. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit in this Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000. Enter PFF for a free entry now at DraftKings.com. That is DraftKings.com. All right, Wes, let's get to it. Our week 4 plays for DraftKings and FanDuel. Wes, who are your plays of the week at the quarterback position?
Okay, at DraftKings, I talked about him a lot in the preseason. I like Skylar Howard of West Virginia going up against Maryland. Of course, Dana Holgorsen, the head coach of West Virginia, he uses an up-tempo spread scheme, and he formed that offense as the offensive coordinator at Texas Tech, Houston, and Oklahoma State, where in seven of 8 years he had just pure offensive juggernauts. So the ceiling for this attack is really something to watch. He's got 4.6 speed, Skylar Howard. Of course, like I said, playing in the spread, so he's got plenty of room to operate. He's averaging 311 yards per game, completing 72% of his passes. That's not even taking drops into account. He's got a 12.5 yards per attempt, and honestly, he's taken off a few times, but his receivers, Shelton Gibson and Javon Durante, have been so good for him that he hasn't needed to leave the pocket. But when he does, it's just going to rack up some points for us. West Virginia's projected to score 37 points. And like I said, those receivers are definitely going to shine this week. And of course, remember Maryland gave up almost 500 yards and 6 touchdowns to Matt Johnson. So, I mean, I'm not saying he's going to do that, but definitely a big game coming for Skylar Howard. And one thing I forgot to mention on all these picks, I'm going to try to keep them under $7,000 just to give you some lesser known players to play in your lineups. So, and then over on FanDuel, actually I mentioned them earlier, the Washington Huskies. I've got Jake Browning going up against California. True freshman, kid's the only quarterback to ever throw for 5,000 yards and 60 touchdowns 3 years in a row in high school football history. Actually threw 91 touchdown passes last year. Anyway, that was college. I mean high school. This is college. So let's talk about what he's doing now. Oh no, he's only the 13th best in the country in accuracy percentage, 77.2. He had some struggles in week 1 against a tough Boise State defense, but over the last 2 games, he's looked really impressive and took down Utah State last week. California's given up 240 yards a game, almost 16 yards per completion, and 6 yards per play. They're giving up almost 450 yards, while the California defense has been pretty good at stopping teams from scoring, but they've been bending but not breaking. But that eventually is going to end. And Washington's projected to score 30 points. So if they can take this victory, then Jake Browning will be well worth the $6,800 on DraftKings. Yeah,
and I really like Skylar Howard a lot. At DraftKings, I'm going with Patrick Mahomes from Texas Tech, $8,900. I'm not staying above the. I'm not going below the 7,000 mark. I'm going well above. But I think Mahomes is worth it. He's one of the slate's most productive quarterbacks, and he's cheaper in comparison to some of the other elite guys. So I think he's kind of one of the cheapest elite options. Tech, as we've said, is going to be in a shootout with TCU. He's going to need to throw to keep up. Tech is projected to score 36.75 points at home. That Tech offense, even though they are good at running the ball better than people think, that offense still runs through Mahomes, who has a really high floor in part because of his rushing production. So I think that he's a great play this week. And then at FanDuel, I'm going with Matt Johnson, 8,600. Johnson is first in the FBS in yards and touchdowns passing, second in passing attempts, third in completions. Through 3 games, he is the most productive passer in the country, and he's tied for the slate's most fantasy points per contest at the position with 37 points. But he has only the 7th highest quarterback salary at the position. So relatively speaking, he is at a discount. Of all the quarterbacks in the slate with at least 30 points per game, he is the cheapest. I don't think that makes a lot of sense considering that he's going against Purdue, which has given up a lot of points so far this year. Bowling Green, they're only a slight favorite. I don't think that makes a lot of sense either. But still, they're projected to score 38.25 points. It wouldn't be surprising if they went above that, but this should be a fast-paced game, lots of back-and-forth scoring. Johnson should be able to pile up the production just as he has the last 3 games so far. Let's go to running back. Who are the guys that you like this week?
All right, well, I mentioned him before, Dare Ogunbowale. Wisconsin, going up, like I said, Hawaii. He's been given 14 to 16 carries and averaging 3.3 receptions. I mentioned his pass catching, and outside of the Alabama game, which was a down game for everyone outside of Alex Erickson. He's been a very productive DFS guy, somebody that you can trust. Wisconsin is projected to win by a lot. They're projected to score almost 40 points. And Hawaii has allowed the 93rd most rushing yards per game at 188.7. My other guy at DraftKings, Dare, is $4,700, by the way, very cheap. LJ Scott is the other guy that I like. Michigan State going up against Central Michigan. If you follow Michigan State head coach Mark D'Antonio, one of the things that you'll learn is that he definitely puts his true freshmen to work. He makes them earn every opportunity on that team. And the fact that Scott has been seeing quality time in that offense in their rotation really says a lot about the impression he has made on that coaching staff. He's got 4.42 speed, which is not, barn burning, but he's 6'1", 217, and extremely elusive. He's and to back that up, he's got a extremely high 87.4 elusive rating after 3 games, and he's breaking a tackle once every 3.9 rushing attempts. Michigan State's a 26.5 point favorite. They're projected to score around 40 points. And now Central Michigan has been decent against the run, 128 yards a game, but that's gonna fall apart as the game wears on, and when Michigan State is up by some points, they're just gonna hand the ball off, and Scott's gonna put a dent in that rushing defense ranking. Over on FanDuel, I've got a guy that is a running back that's going to is actually the underdog, which is not something I would normally do, but this is a different type of situation. East Carolina is projected to lose by 10 to Virginia Tech, but I like Chris Hairston at $5,300. I expect him to get his carries early. The Virginia Tech defense ranks 108th in rushing defense. Hairston has actually produced more than half of his rushing total from 15-plus yard runs. For a big guy, that's impressive. He got 4 touchdowns. If East Carolina does fall behind, Hairston has caught every target that's been thrown to him, 16 passes. So definitely plays well into either the half-point FanDuel or also plays well into the DraftKings. And then real quick, the last guy I have is Damian Jones-Moore of Toledo, the guy that'll probably that will fill in there for Kareem Hunt going up against Arkansas State. He's bare minimum $4,500. Last week when Kareem went down, he came into the game and all he did was put up six touches, 6 carries for 27 yards and a touchdown with 2 catches and another 27 yards against Iowa State. The Rockets are favored to beat Arkansas State by a touchdown, and Arkansas State has the 78th ranked rushing defense, allowing 5 yards a carry. It's a complete steal with Damian Jones-Moore, and just revealing his name is I'm losing money by doing it.
I really like that. So unlike with the quarterbacks, I'm going cheap with all 4 of my running backs, but I tend to like to do that. At DraftKings, I'm going with Wendell Smallwood from West Virginia, 4,900. He's been the lead back for West Virginia through 2 games in which he has 231 yards from scrimmage and 3 touchdowns, as well as 8 receptions. West Virginia is a 17-point favorite at home against Maryland, that Maryland defense that is really not good at all. West Virginia is projected to score 37 points. Again, Maryland has that weak defense. I think West Virginia is likely to accumulate a chunk of its production on the ground, and that should all probably go to Smallwood. I think he's at a pretty big discount. And then I'm going really crazy here for my second pick. Justin Stockton from Texas Tech, 3,400, super cheap. He's a GPP play unless you're me, and then you put him in your cash game. But as I say, that is insane. Stockton, he's the change of pace back for the Red Raiders. He's not the starter, but he already has 3 touchdowns on 21 total touches this year. He has scored in every game so far. And even going back to last year, Stockton and not lead back DeAndre Washington has led all Texas Tech running backs in touchdowns, even though last year Stockton trailed Washington significantly in touches. This year, the touch distribution is it's not equal, but it's getting close. It's a 1 to 2 time share. I think that Stockton should probably see some touches in this game against TCU. And with the pace at which Tech plays, the projected point total, and really Stockton's role in that offense, I think he has an underrated chance of turning one of his touches into a touchdown in week 4. But again, the really important thing is that he's cheap. At FanDuel, I'm going with Vic Nwere. We talked about him earlier from Cal, 4,500 minimum salary guy. Start him only if Daniel Lasco is out, but I expect that Lasco will be out. Lasco, as you mentioned, was out last week, and in his place, and where he had 16 carries, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns. And where he's a big guy, 6'1", 230 pounds, he leads all running backs on that team in touchdowns. And where he is likely to lose some touches to change of pace running back Kalfani Muhammad, but he's on an offense with a good quarterback. Cal should get some opportunities near the goal line, and I think when that happens, he will get the chance to score, and that's really what you're looking for with him. And then finally, at FanDuel, I'm going with Patrick Skov from Georgia Tech. One day I'm going to figure out if I'm pronouncing his last name right. I really need to figure that out because I mention him every week. But I'm going to keep on mentioning him as long as he is crazy cheap. He's a big guy who gets a lot of touches and goal line carries on a run heavy offense, but he's never valued like that. So I'm going to keep on recommending him as long as he's cheap and continues to produce. Georgia Tech is playing on the road against Duke, 8.5-point favorite, projected to score 32.25 points. I expect Georgia Tech, big surprise, to run the ball just as much as they always do. As a point of comparison, Scoff has 7 touchdowns in 3 games. That is exactly the same as Derrick Henry of Alabama. He has 21.9 fantasy points per game this season, which is more than the 19.3 points per game that Ezekiel Elliott has, who's the slate's most expensive running back. Skov is not a great player, but he's a productive player, and I think that production will continue this week. Let's go to the wide receivers. Who do you like there?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, Quay Searcy and Broderick Snoddy are also out. So, yeah, he's going to get – I think there's something like 12 or 13 available carries that Scott could pick up in addition to his normal load. At wide receiver, a guy that we talked about earlier and we were going back and forth, I really like KD Cannon. He comes in at $6,300 going up against Rice. Here's the thing. KD Cannon, if he's taken 60% of his snaps out of the slot, if he were to continue and see the majority of snaps out of that formation, he'll be going up against Zach Espinosa of Rice, who's given up 5 yards per coverage snap, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And then even if he were to go to the outside against Rice, we're looking at another Ryan Pollard, who's also given up 5 yards per coverage snap. This is going to be a nasty game for Rice. It's gonna get ugly. It's gonna get ugly fast. And to be honest with you, I just think Matt's a little bitter because he's a TCU alum and doesn't want to give props to KD. But man, he's something else. His average target depth was actually 20% higher than Corey Coleman's last year. And this season he's seen 60% of his targets beyond 20 yards, and he's caught both of the catchable targets for a touchdown. The Baylor obviously is predicted to score over 50 points, and Rice has already surrendered 6 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers, and they're allowing an amazing 18.53 yards per completion, which is ridiculous. Maybe the worst pass defense in the country, and they're going up against Baylor. Okay. The other guy, and I really like him in the DraftKings format, he's a possession receiver, is Isaiah Jones. We mentioned the East Carolina game against Virginia Tech. Yeah, he's a guy that is not going to score a lot of touchdowns, not going to break off huge chunks of yardage, but he's a guy that in the Florida game he saw 20 targets. Last year with 2 wide receivers above him on the pecking order, he still saw 8.7 targets a game. He's seeing well above that this year. He's produced a 2.23 yards per route run on 95 snaps in route, despite running the short routes. It's every time he catches the ball, it's another point for my team. I really like him, and he's impressively caught every catchable target, all 30 attempts thrown to him. He's caught every single one of them. So he just eats the ball up. And East Carolina is actually projected to lose by 10. I don't know if I mentioned that before. If they do go down, that'll be good for him as well, because they'll be airing it out. And I'm looking for him to have a big game. Yeah, and he comes in at 5,000. KD Cannon was 6,300. A guy that it's basically my Patrick Skov. Aaron Burbridge, Michigan State. I'm all over him at $6,800. Going up against Central Michigan. Central Michigan has been statistically solid against the pass, but remember 2 of the 3 games that they played was against Monmouth and Syracuse, and those are not passing offenses that you would normally look as worthy of counting the stats from. Last week against Air Force, Burbridge put up 8 catches, 156 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's clearly the number one target for Connor Cook, and Michigan State is a 26.5-point favorite. They're projected to score over 40 points. It's going to be a big day. The other guy I like is Brandon Holloway. Now, I mentioned him last week as a fantasy feud pick. And he only got one carry, and the reason is, and it was actually a good thing, despite whatever I lost because in the lineups that I played him in. Actually, Mississippi State, I believe their starters only played the very first series, and they took a seat for the rest of the day, going up against Northwestern State. Now, here's the thing about Brandon Holloway: he's eligible at wide receiver in FanDuel, yet he's their starting running back. He's somebody that you simply have to have in your lineup at $5,800. They're going up against Auburn. Auburn has the number 100 total defense, giving up 5.7 yards per play. They're the 123rd out of 125th rushing defense, giving up 270 yards per game. I say that it was good that he took an early seat because he was in a competition with Ashton Shumpert for the lead back role, and actually Shumpert led the team in rushing attempts against Northwestern State. So I think the change has been made, and we're looking at Holloway as the new Mississippi State running back. Auburn is favored by 2.5 points, but Mississippi State is still projected to score close to 30 points. And my prediction piece, I went with definitely Mississippi State. I don't see Auburn pulling out a win against such a tough opponent with so many changes they're making on their offense and defense.
All right. Well, first I want to say I am not bitter about Baylor. I really think Katie Kane is a talented guy. I just think that Coleman is more that lead receiver, at least this year. But you never know. I think they're a great tag team option. But I am totally going to seem like a TCU homer with my pick right here of Josh Doxson at DraftKings, 7,500. But this is more of an arbitrage play on site pricing than anything else. So Doxson is the most expensive wide receiver at FanDuel. At DraftKings, he's only the third most expensive receiver. It's easier to get him in your lineup on that platform, and he's a guy that you probably would want in some of your lineups. TCU's a 7-point favorite on the road against Tech. It will be a shootout, lots of passes. TCU's projected to get 43.75 points. They could go higher. Doxson is TCU's number one wide receiver. He should get a lot of opportunities to make plays. And then the other guy at DraftKings for me is Roger Lewis of Bowling Green State, 7,700. I think he makes for a really strong stack with quarterback Matt Johnson, given that Bowling Green has a high projected point total and that Lewis is one of the most productive wide receivers in the country. Through 3 games, Lewis is first in the FBS in yards and touchdowns receiving, 6th in receptions. He has 24, 510, 5 stat line on the season. In 2015, he has scored 41.7% of Bowling Green's touchdowns receiving, a pretty high number, and 31.3% of its total touchdowns. He should have lots of opportunities to score multiple touchdowns as he's done the last 2 games. At FanDuel, I think I mentioned him last week, but I still really like him. William Fuller from Notre Dame, 7,900. A holdover from last week, but he has 18 receptions, 397 yards, and 5 touchdowns in only 3 games. That gives him 52.1% of Notre Dame's receiving yards and 71.4% of its touchdowns receiving. Those are just incredibly elite numbers, both in terms of total production, but then also how efficient he's been in getting those numbers. He's the 3rd most productive wide receiver on the slate. But he's the 3rd most expensive wide receiver, so I think I'm basically getting what I'm going to pay for. Notre Dame is a 29-point favorite at home against UMass. They're projected to score 44 points. Notre Dame's offense basically runs through Fuller. I think he should continue his streak of big games. And then I was going to pick Aaron Burbridge as my guy, but you sniped him. So I'm going to call an audible and go with another guy from TCU, Colby Listenby at 6,000. I think he's a good discount for what is going to be happening in that game. Given how high that the projected score is, given how many touchdowns Trevone Boykin is likely to throw in that game, He's likely to throw touchdowns to multiple receivers. And whenever that happens, Colby Listenby is a guy who almost automatically is guaranteed a touchdown. I think 75 yards and a touchdown is kind of his like kind of sweet spot of where he could end up in this game. But he's a big play receiver. He's TCU's biggest play threat. He really does have upside for much more. So I think he's a guy that you could squeeze into your lineup, and he's cheaper than some of the other elite options, but I think he has that elite upside if things break a certain way. All right, let's go to the tight end at FanDuel. Who do you like there?
All right, I like Rodney Mills, of course, of Temple. He's going up against Notre Dame, and he was shut out week 2, the first game for UMass. I'm sorry, not Temple. UMass plays for UMass. They played Temple last week, and actually he put up 5 catches, 104 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the top 50 Temple pass defense. They're likely to go down very big, very quick against Notre Dame, but I see UMass pushing their starters, getting some experience for a lot of guys, and Rodney Mills is last season played fullback. That was his official position, but this season he's switching completely to tight end. I think he could get a lot of garbage time stats for me, and I've actually not picked any big tight ends this year. I've struggled on my tight end picks, so I think this will be the one.
I like that, and I almost went with him. If I weren't going with Tyler Higbee from Western Kentucky, I would have gone with Mills, but I'm going with the same player, the same price, and hopefully the same result I had last week. Again, I'm paying up for Higbee, but last week he had 11 receptions for 109 yards and a touchdown. He's basically doing his best Gronk impersonation by putting up wide receiver caliber numbers each week. He leads Western Kentucky in receptions with 22, and with those receptions, he has 299 yards and 2 touchdowns. He has 40% of the team's touchdowns receiving. That's a pretty high mark for a tight end. This week, Western Kentucky is a 20.5-point favorite at home, projected to score 44 points against Miami of Ohio. The odds are pretty good that Higbee finds the end zone once again, and I think he has a minimum floor of 4 receptions and 75 yards receiving. All right, let's go to the flex at DraftKings. Who do you like there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm cheating with this pick. It's one of my preseason guys. Justin Jackson of Northwestern comes in at $6,700 against Ball State. All props to Ball State, but we're talking some Big Ten pro-style offenses here. Justin Jackson is likely to run all over Ball State. Ball State is allowing a decent 165.3 yards per game with against inferior opponents and 5 yards per carry. Justin Jackson is likely to take advantage of Northwestern's 20-point win that they're projected for, and they're projected to score 35 points. Well, a lot of those points go through Justin Jackson's hands, and then basically when they get the lead decently, they just hand the ball off to him to run out the clock. He does a great job. Probably the best jump cut in all of college football. He's not been as dominant as last year, but he's gone up against some stiff opponents. So I really like Justin Jackson for such a cheap amount. It's ridiculous.
All right, so for me with the flex, I'm going with, you're going to have to tell me how to pronounce his name, the running back from Northern Illinois, Joel Bougnon.
I heard him pronounce it in the Ohio State game. It was like Boignon. It was like French or something.
There you go. Boignon.
Yes.
Joel Boignon. Okay, perfect. I can handle that. So Boignon is basically a cheaper version of Scov. He's 5,400. When when a running back touches the ball for that team, it's usually Boignon. He leads the team with 57 carries for 282 yards and 5 touchdowns in 3 games. Even though they played Ohio State last week, he was still respectable and picking up tough yards against a really tough defense. This week he's playing against a Boston College unit I think has defensive stats that are vastly inflated because they've had 2 matchups against FCS opponents. And it's not to say that Boston College doesn't have a good defense. I just don't think that they're actually quite as stout as the numbers would suggest. The Huskies are only 4-point underdogs. As you've suggested, they actually have a better chance than that of winning this game. And I think a lot of that will have to do with them running the ball. I expect that Bouillon at some point will get touches near the goal line. And really, with him, that's what I'm hunting for. I'm looking for a guy who has the potential of scoring 2 touchdowns. And I could definitely see how that happens because he is the guy who will get the ball near the goal line if they get near the goal line. So that's really what I'm shooting for. All right, it is time for Wes's winners. Wes, give me 2 guys you think could be big for GPPs, 1 guy on DraftKings and 1 guy on FanDuel.
All right, and I'm switching up the rules a little bit with this one as well. I'm going to try to keep it to 4,000 or less on DraftKings and 5,000 or less on FanDuel. Over on DraftKings, I'm going to go with Arizona State wide receiver Tim White. He comes in at $3,700. He did not play in Week 1 in the loss against Texas A&M, but in the past 2 weeks, he has established a connection playing against New Mexico and Cal Poly, mind you, but it doesn't hide the fact that he's caught all of his catchable targets in those 2 games and has connected with Mike Bersavici for a touchdown in each. And I really like him this week going up against USC, who, if you think their defense is like years past, you're sorely mistaken. Over on FanDuel, I mentioned him earlier. It's one of your boys. Well, at least plays for your school, Kavonte Turpin. He comes in at $4,900. Like I said, Desmond White looking like he's not going to play, their slot receiver. And Kavonte Turpin has averaged almost 10 points a game in limited time, just getting scraps from that TCU attack. There's several guys on the roster that are close to 10 points per game, just coming in for a few plays and scoring a couple touchdowns. That's all. And I really like him on FanDuel for $4,900.
All right, and then finally, Wes, give me your 2 plays of the week for Fantasy Feud.
All right, and you had to take a shot at Ezekiel Elliott, so I'm gonna come back at you. Actually, he was on my list before, but over on Fantasy Feud, the way they do the salaries, they take the average points per game that average fantasy points per game that player scores, and it's compared to all of the other players at that position. The player with the highest average is given the highest salary. So last week with Tennessee, Preston Williams, they were going up against Western Carolina, I believe, and he got some late run and put up 2 touchdowns and 100 yards. Well, it was his first game action this year. Well, now he's averaging 23 points a game. He's up there, the number 2 wide receiver on Fantasy Feud, and I doubt he even plays this week against Florida. Well, as far as Ezekiel Elliott, I'm sure that you're aware the Ohio State offense has not been clicking yet. But if you think that the team is done and you want to stick a fork in them, then you're going to lose a lot of money. The Ohio State offense will come back, and Ezekiel Elliott comes in at the 14th highest priced running back on Fantasy Feud at $120,000. It is get him while he's not, basically. You gotta have him in your lineup at that price. And then the second guy, I've already mentioned him, Katie Cannon. Another situation where due to the game flow and the score, basically, Katie Cannon has not played very much outside of the SMU game when he put up a couple explosive plays, and he comes in at $60,000 on Fantasy Feud, which is, basically bare minimum. And how could you not like him? I told you the numbers of the secondary of Rice. It's going to be a big day for Corey Coleman, Katie Cannon, and likely Jay Lee and Shock Linwood, and of course Seth Russell. It's play your Baylor Bears. It's going to be an explosion there.
All right, Wes, I do love both of those calls. But taking multiple shots at me there, just you couldn't end the episode without defending Ezekiel Elliott and Katie Cannon one more time. I really do like both of those calls. Both of those guys highly discounted at Fantasy Feud. Wes, fantastic stuff as always. Just as the best college teams right now are hitting their stride, I think we are really hitting our stride with this show. And I think that's going to do it for this edition of the College Daily Slant. Be sure to tune in next episode for our DraftKings and FanDuel Week 5 plays. Of course, you can catch us on PFF Radio. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, listen to the show on Stitcher and Blog Talk Radio, and watch the show on YouTube and the Fantasy Sports Network. For Wes Huber on Twitter at PFF_West, I'm Matt Friedman, Matt F. the Oracle. Thanks for tuning in.